Welcome to today's informational video about the NINDS Sustainable Transformation of Institutional Research Rigor, or STIRR program. I'm Devin Crawford, a program director in the NINDS Office of Research Quality, and I am excited to share with you some information about a new funding opportunity that was recently released. And with this funding opportunity, we hope to stimulate a stronger culture of performing and rewarding high-quality research. Now, what motivated this initiative? As the NINDS director, Dr. Walter Koroshetz, wrote in this 2021 director's message, good science is rigorous science. In other words, high quality, rigorous research is foundational to the scientific enterprise. And NINDS values rigor and transparency enough to include them explicitly in the latest strategic plan as a cross-cutting strategy integrated across institute activities. And in this plan, NINDS acknowledged that research is often flawed or not transparently reported, which can undermine scientific advancement. And research is most valuable when it is rigorously conducted and transparently reported. As an example, I am highlighting here a set of studies on the superoxide dismutase 1 or SOD1 mouse model of ALS. So in the early 2000s, many drugs have been found to improve survival in this mouse model, bringing hope of treatments to people with ALS. And you can see the increased mean survival of each of the drugs listed here in the blue bars that go off to the right. However, almost every single one of these drugs failed in expensive, time-consuming human clinical trials. And after these failures, the ALS Therapy Development Institute actually repeated the preclinical work and found that, at least in their hands, each of these drugs did not actually improve survival in mice. And you can see their findings in the dark bars. So what exactly was the difference this time around? Well, the new experiments they performed had blinding of investigators, randomization to treatment group, sufficient sample size that they calculated in advance, predefined inclusion-exclusion criteria, sex and litter matching, and transparent reporting of these items. So these are examples of rigorous practices that we believe should be performed when possible and transparently reported for almost every study. And you can see that when the mouse studies were performed more rigorously, they better match the results seen in clinical trial. So I often imagine how much time, money, and patient risk could have been avoided if the original animal studies had been more rigorous and transparent. And this underscores the importance of rigor and transparency in ensuring the best use of our time and resources. Now, despite some recognition of how important such practices are, you would not necessarily be able to tell this from looking at publications. So this study used text mining to measure reporting in over 2 million papers from PubMed. So it represents a wide swath of the biomedical publishing space. And yet they found that despite some gains over the last 20 years, reporting is still very low. You can see randomization topping out at about 30% and blinding and sample size estimation at about 10%. So this suggests to us that there are forces preventing a widespread adoption of best practices in terms of rigorous research design. Now, we don't entirely blame scientists for this situation because scientists are not performing their work in a vacuum. They exist in a scientific ecosystem and are under various pressures. There are professional societies that influence career development norms for scientists. Journals often incentivize scientists to tell the flashiest and most exciting stories possible in order to get published. Funders and the peer reviewers there often take publication productivity into account, including whether articles are published in high-profile journals when considering an investigator's expertise. And then on top of it all, institutional promotion and tenure committees rely heavily on publication record and funding history when deciding about career advancement. So careful scientists can actually be at a disadvantage in an environment like this because careful science can take more time and produce fewer high-profile publications, hindering their careers. So all of the parties in this system have a responsibility for fostering a culture that actually incentivizes rigor and transparency. And all of them need to adapt if we want to see a change in the culture. And you can see more about our views on this issue in the recent publication listed at the bottom. Now, in response to these issues, NINDS is taking an active role in trying to change the culture of science by influencing each of these contributors to the ecosystem. For example, for publishers, we've worked to increase transparency by defining a minimal set of 4 items to report for every study. And these are sometimes called the Landis 4. And those items have been incorporated into a lot of journal reporting guidelines. As a funder, we've also taken multiple steps to promote rigorous experimental design and reporting. For example, we have published guidance on our website about rigor elements to consider when writing NINDS grant applications, but we've also made it clear on our website that in addition to rigor assessment during peer review, we consider an investigator's rigor and transparency when deciding whether to fund a grant beyond the pay line. We've also worked with scientific societies to craft guidance for improving transparency in conference talks and poster presentations. And in terms of individual scientists, we participate in community engagement through talks, social media, workshops, online resources. So you can check out our website. We're also developing a large online educational resource to improve training in the principles of rigorous research. And we've also released a new challenge prize, the purpose of which is to identify and reward individuals as well as small groups for increasing attention to rigor and transparency above and beyond their normal job duties. But for institutions, we don't have a lot of programs to specifically impact local scientific culture that's related to rigor. We know that institutions affect things like whether or not you have a job, the space that you work in, the infrastructure available to you, the colleagues around you, and all of these other things to ultimately affect the culture of doing science. And recognizing this, Begley and colleagues wrote in 2015 that institutions must support and reward researchers who do solid, not just flashy science, and hold to account those whose methods are questionable. So generally, the scientific community recognizes the institution as an important locus for incentivizing good science. And for this reason, we have released this new funding opportunity, the NINDS Sustainable Transformation of Institutional Research Rigor, or STIRR program. So this initiative will support the establishment of programs to enhance research rigor and transparency practices within academic and research institutions to promote a culture of high-quality neuroscience research. And this funding opportunity is meant to support an individual department, office, or other intra-institutional entity. So this is not at the level of the entire institution, but rather at a more local level within the institution. And since we're in NINDS, we will also focus on entities that have a critical mass of neuroscientists that will benefit from the program. So, for example, at least some of the labs participating in a program should be performing research in the NINDS mission space, but participants don't need to only do neuroscience. And finally, there's a 3-year limit to the awards since it should be kickstarting a new program rather than sustaining an already successful program. Now, we want to be clear about what we mean by rigor and transparency for the purposes of this funding opportunity, since sometimes people, define them different ways. So we say in the request for applications, or RFA, that scientific rigor and transparency refer to improving the design, execution, analysis, and reporting of experiments to minimize the risk of bias and or chance observations, especially for confirmatory or hypothesis testing experiments. So this includes practices I mentioned earlier, such as blinding, randomization, sample size estimation, transparent reporting. And you can find more comprehensive lists of related practices at these 2 websites if you need, some more clarity about how we define rigor in experimental design. Programs supported by STIRR must have a number of common goals. Applicants should aim to create a model program for the broader neuroscience community to evaluate, modify, and emulate. Should develop and pilot innovative approaches to improving neuroscience, research rigor, and transparency through changes in things like community resources, policies, and or practices. The program should catalyze culture change at the level of the intra-institutional entity applying for the award and the cohort of researchers in the local scientific community targeted by the program. So the applicant should evaluate the effectiveness of the proposed activities to ensure that improvements in research rigor and transparency are achieved. Should disseminate data on the effectiveness and longevity of the interventions and share lessons learned or best practices with the wider scientific community. They should strive to sustain successful activities beyond the period of the award and identify barriers and or enablers to scaling beyond the applicant entity. In short, we want to identify successful interventions that could spread to other entities inside or outside of the awardee institution, thereby potentially changing the culture on an even bigger scale. In order to change how rigorously researchers perform and report their science, institutional entities applying for a STIRR award will need a leadership team to represent the entity and to implement the program. Now, this team will be responsible for guiding the specified cohort of scientists to improve the research practice or practices being targeted by the program. And at least some of these scientists need to be doing research in the NINDS mission space in order to ensure relevance to NINDS. Now, if the program is successful, then we will hopefully see some broader effects, like other researchers within the institution noticing the benefits of improving their research practices, and then sharing in the new resources and changing their own behaviors to align with this new culture of the original cohort. This, of course, might require broader institutional support that may take time to obtain. And with proper evaluation and dissemination, then perhaps leadership at additional institutions will make changes, and researchers in the broader scientific community will get on board. If or when such successful activities are widely supported and implemented, we might begin to see broader scientific culture change. And this shows how sparking a small change within a single cohort of scientists through STIRR could have much larger impacts in the community. And we envision that we will support a variety of types of programs under this initiative, ranging from more focused to broader activities. For example, we could see applicants propose to implement recognition and awards to promote awareness of and incentivize best practices. We could see appointment of dedicated specialists to change workflows. We could see restructuring of trainee programs to emphasize high-quality research over, say, number of publications. And similarly, we could see restructuring of hiring, promotion, and tenure criteria to do the same. We could see policies that better enforce rigor and transparency practices. We could see more standard operating procedures or new infrastructure, creation of comprehensive educational or professional development programs, and even partnerships with outside entities to transform how the institutional entity operates. And these are all just example ways that institutional entities can make tangible changes to try to shift the culture. And as these are very different activities, each of these examples would need to be justified and feasible for the particular entity applying. And entities could even propose from one to multiple of these types of activities in a single application in order to create a coherent program. It's also important to understand what kinds of activities are out of scope for STIRR. For example, specific research projects within laboratories. We don't want to be supporting specific scientific projects. Programs focused on activities that could be supported through existing NIH funding mechanisms. Replication or simple expansion of existing programs at applicant institutions, so just increasing the number of people doing something that already exists. Research integrity activities focus on ethics related to animal use, human subjects, or research misconduct, basically anything already required under NIH responsible conduct of research policies, as well as large multi-institutional or field-wide initiatives to develop best practices that are implemented during the award period beyond the applicant institution. So things like common data elements that are applicable across fields, or recommendations for publishers or funders or other national or international networks. So if you have any questions about whether or not activities you have in mind are appropriate for STIRR, please contact NINDS program staff. Now, here's some basic top-level information for anyone interested in applying. The NIH notice number is RFA NS 24020, and I have the link here to the NIH guide so you can look up the funding opportunity. The mechanism is an RC2, so it's not your basic R01. It's a high-impact research and research infrastructure program. And in terms of who should apply, institutional entities who want to develop and pilot innovative approaches to improving research rigor and transparency through change in local culture. And here's some more details about STIRR that are a bit more in the weeds. The project period is a maximum of 3 years. In terms of maximum budget, it's just the actual needs of the proposed project. There's no pre-approval required. Receipt dates. The first receipt date is October 17, 2023, and there will be 2 more, October 17, 2024 and October 17, 2025. In terms of foreign eligibility, please note that non-US institutions are not allowed, but foreign components are allowed. Finally, resubmissions are allowed because there are multiple receipt dates. So as long as there is another receipt date available, you can resubmit to that other receipt date. For those thinking about an application, I have a list here of major points that need discussed in the research strategy portion of the application. We have significance, innovation, and underneath approach, we have implementation, evaluation, dissemination, scalability and sustainability, and milestones. So, starting with significance, some of the major questions you will need to answer are: what rigor practices need improved in this cohort? Why did you choose the particular intervention? Did you have a reason to believe it will work? What outcomes are expected? What's the impact supposed to be? And unsurprisingly, under innovation, you'll need to describe what is unique or new. Implementation will have many of the major nuts and bolts about the program, such as what it is you actually plan to do, who's leading it, the institutional entity involved, who's being targeted, so the scientific cohort that's participating, how this affects neuroscience, and how you will actually get it done. Evaluation is important because you will need to know what your metrics are of short-term and long-term success. How will you even know if the program has been effective? And some of these activities may even occur after the funding period has ended, since culture change is a long-term commitment. Now, evaluation isn't worth anything without dissemination. It's important to describe how you will share lessons learned and when and how often they will be shared. Otherwise, other institutions can't emulate the intervention. And again, some of these activities might occur after funding is ended, which is to be expected with such a long-term effort. Speaking of other institutions or entities, we would like to know how scalable your program might be and what resources might be needed to scale the program, but note that you do not need to scale it yourself. It's just important to know how useful the program might be to others. Another important aspect of the program is its potential sustainability. So how will you ensure successful activities, including evaluation and dissemination, continue long-term? And what resources will be available after funding ends? So without institutional commitment to maintain the culture change, then even programs with some short-term success may ultimately be destined for failure. And finally, we asked for a table or a chart with key milestones describing when benchmarks will happen and how achievement of major goals will be measured. So in terms of timeline, letters of intent are extremely helpful for planning, but they are not required. So if you are submitting one, they are due September 17th of the year in which you are applying. And the due date for the application will be October 17th, so 30 days later in each of the particular years. So October 17th, 2023, October 17th, 2024, and October 17th, 2025 for the 3 receipt dates. So this means that our first receipt date is this fall. And please, please, please get the application in on time because we cannot accept late applications. The scientific merit review will follow along in March of the next year. The advisory council review will occur around May, and the earliest start date will be in July. So if you submit this fall, you could be funded next summer. And with that, I just want to make a plug for following us on social media. We do have a Twitter or X account where we post updates and reminders about things like funding opportunities or other activities we're doing. And you're encouraged to share this information with your colleagues. Before wrapping up, though, I would like to go over a few frequently asked questions. Firstly, who can I ask if my application idea fits the funding opportunity? Well, that would be me. I'm the program officer for this funding opportunity, and I would be happy to answer any questions you have about STIRR. My email address is listed here, and it's in the RFA. So, how many awards will be funded? NINDS intends to fund at least 5 awards annually, depending on the number of meritorious proposals, the size and scope of those proposals, as well as NIH appropriations. And so the answer is it depends, but NIH has made a commitment to this RFA. However, of course, uncertainties in our budget mean that nothing is guaranteed. The next FAQ is, what is an intra-institutional entity or organizational entity? Can individuals apply? Well, entities include some sort of recognized group beyond a single laboratory within an institution or organization that supports research activities, such as a department, division, or center. You have offices or libraries, cross-institutional committees, or other cross-institutional collaborations, as well as graduate programs. And individuals that are serving as the principal investigator or other key personnel must include in the application a justification for that particular entity being involved in leading the program, as well as a letter of institutional commitment. So, in other words, the entity is not expected to be at the level of the entire institution, but must also reach multiple scientific groups with its influence. So it's important in the application to show how this entity will be involved in the program and what level of commitment it has made to ensure the program's success. Now, what can I include in my budget? You can include participant support costs, consultant costs, equipment, supplies, travel, other program-related expenses. It just cannot duplicate items generally available at the applicant institution. And as an aside, because this is an RFA, prior approval is not needed to propose greater than $500,000 in direct costs, but the budget must be justified by the needs of the program. So you may be wondering, how many activities should I propose? How comprehensive should the program be? Well, everything from focused, more easily implemented programs all the way to broader, more comprehensive programs are both expected and encouraged. And the applicant just needs to demonstrate both a need for the proposed program and a commitment by the institution to long-term success. So it's expected that there might be some trade-offs between scalability, so something that's easier to implement, with potential impact, which could be reach or effectiveness. So the lessons learned from these varieties of programs will be valuable to the broader scientific community. So it is up to the applicant to decide which activities fit the local community, and we encourage applications from these different types of programs. So you've heard multiple times in this video that the program needs to be relevant to neuroscience, but why exactly do the activities have to be relevant to neuroscience, and how many neuroscientists need to be included? Well, the individual rigor and transparency practices that you're targeting with the program don't actually need to be specific to neuroscience because they are expected to be broadly applicable. Therefore, the lessons learned need to be relevant at least to science performed within the NINDS mission space. So remember that principles of rigorous research tend to apply across many fields. However, to ensure that scientists performing NINDS relevant research benefit from this program, the scientific cohort targeted for intervention must include neuroscientists, but it doesn't need to be exclusive to neuroscientists. The applicant just needs to provide quantitative evidence of neuroscience inclusion. We have another question about the potential program activities. Can I include already developed or existing activities in the proposed program? The answer to that is yes, but if you're building upon previously implemented activities, you need to provide clear justification for how the proposed program offers a novel, innovative, or substantially modified approach to solving the identified gap or area of need that you identified within the local scientific community. This one may be a sticking point for some applicants. Why do I have to propose activities that continue beyond the period of support? So a major goal of this RFA is to create culture change, which is by definition a sustained change in norms, behaviors, and attitudes that have become ingrained in the local scientific community. So this RFA is meant to kickstart such culture change, but success hinges on the institution demonstrating commitment to rigor and transparency, which is a continual process. And so many important gains may take years to observe. So remember that this funding opportunity is just meant to enable the institutional entity to start a transformation in how it operates. It's up to the institution to ensure that the culture change lasts. And finally, how will review of my application work? Well, applications will be reviewed by a special emphasis panel organized by the NINDS Scientific Review Branch. The reviewers will be asked to evaluate each application according to the review criteria that you can find in the funding opportunity under Section 5. And then applications will undergo a second level of review by our council before final funding decisions are made by the NINDS director. But if you'd like more information about how review works in general, please check out the NINDS website at the bottom that explains the review process. And I suspect that many people watching may have more questions. In this case, please visit our website that has many more FAQs answered for you. This may be a valuable resource if you are interested in applying. And with that, I hope that this funding opportunity interests you and that you seriously consider applying. I have included information here on how you can contact us or find out more about our office, as well as about this funding opportunity. And with that, I thank you for your attention.